Okay, this is part two of my hero archetype thing. Um, Now I'm gonna finish where I left off. I'm gonna start talking about this sheepdog, sheep, and wolf philosophy, which is you hear it a lot on internet forums. It came from retired Colonel Grossman. Here's the problem. There's a problem with this archetype or these sets of archetypes. For one, it goes back to what I was talking about in the first video about the self, the shadow, the persona, and the ego. For two, well, what you're looking at here is the sheepdog is nothing more than another name for the hero. Of course, the sheep are the victims, and the wolf is the villain. Now, this is the problem because when you're talking about sheepdog, sheep, and wolves, you also have a shepherd in there somewhere. And who's the shepherd? Where's the shepherd in this ideology, in this philosophy? Now, the shepherd can be a symbol for the government, for the higher ideas of the government, some ideology. Uh, for the sake of simplicity, we'll say it's both the government and the ideologies of the government, which don't really seem to kind of coexist right now. Um, your sheepdog is your protector of the sheep and your punisher of the wolves. Uh, there you go, your hero. Um, Now, I'm hugely against the idea of having a victim archetype. I don't even think there are people that are there, the perpetual victims. Someone has done something to harm me. Someone has done something to slight me. Someone doesn't agree with me, so I'm going to whine and cry, bitch and moan, and get someone else to get revenge for me and call it justice. The problem with this is that, well, for one, uh, there's that whole issue of mental toughness, and I hate to say this, but I agree with S.L.A. Marshall, who wrote the book Men Against Fire, used a lot of the same data as Colonel Grossman, and came to a completely separate conclusion. Um, the or a completely different conclusion, I should say. What I'm talking about here is that when you start seeing people as the victims and the sheepdogs and the wolves, uh, you've kind of left out the shepherd who controls the sheepdog. Because if you just leave a sheepdog on his own, eventually he's going to get hungry and it's either another dog or lamb chops on the dinner table. And it happens. The problem with the hero archetype, like I said, is that you have that shadow. And when that shadow influences the sheepdog, it doesn't matter if he has to, uh, hurt a few innocent sheep in the course of taking out a wolf in sheep's clothing, because he's the sheepdog and he's the protector, and it's for the greater good of the herd or the flock or whatever they call a bunch of sheep together. And you see this same argument. This actually, Colonel Grossman espouses exactly what I was saying is bad about the hero archetype. For a person with a degree in psychology, which is a lot bigger than mine, this guy, in all honesty, I put no faith in him whatsoever. I think he's catering to certain groups of people and using his degrees to kind of espouse the arguments they want to make and say, oh, well, this guy came up with it. Even though other people have made the exact opposite argument out of the same data. Um, I think the idea of teaching that the sheepdogs, the protectors, the hero archetype exist because there's a victim archetype. Why don't we just teach everyone to be their own heroes? How about we just remove the victim archetype altogether? Why don't we just call it exactly what it is? Uh, the problem here is that you start seeing that same hero archetype espoused. It justifies the police and the government and the military and the Patriot Act and this and this and this and that. You can take it and you can run with it. Like I said, you have that shadow and then you have that self. You have that regulating ability of your mind to choose between your options and outcomes, and then you have shadow, which is the dark side of the human psyche, the rage, the anger, uh, the lust, greed, all of those things that are there that are an influence upon the hero, and eventually they go from protecting the sheep to punishing the wolves, and eventually when there's no more wolves they start looking for wolves in sheep's clothing, and if a few sheep happen to go away because you're looking, for that evil thing that you must punish, it's there. Basically, I espouse a completely different uh, type of argument here, and uh, here's my little counter argument to the sheepdog, and wolf argument of Colonel Grossman. My counter argument is this. Now, for every flock of sheep, they must be guided by a shepherd. Our shepherd is the archetype of the government. Doesn't matter what you think of the government still fleeces the sheep. It still uh, strips them of wool, sells it at the market, and when they need to eat, yep, lamb chops on the table. Your sheepdog, which is your protectors and punishers of the flock, they're the ones who herd the sheep and assist the shepherd, are basically fed from the shepherd's table, which means, yep, they're eating lamb too, and they benefit from whatever chew toys or other things the shepherd buys from the wool of the sheep. Uh, Now, your sheep, the perpetual victims, you are basically the protected and punished by the sheepdog, and they're food for both the sheepdog and the shepherd, which is your big sign for the government, and the sheepdog is, of course, people who work for the government to regulate the civilian population. Now, that's all cute and happy and fine in theory, but again, we have the shadow. The shadow represents the negative side of the personality, which we all have because we're all human. This influences many times for the sheepdog to become basically, we'll use the term rabid, and turn on the shepherd or the flock of sheep. Now, the wolves are seen as villains because, unlike the sheep, wolves have teeth. They have the same teeth as the shepherd, or I'm sorry, the sheepdog. They have the ability to fight back, the ability to defend themselves, the ability to get their own justice, which is, of course, revenge. And they don't depend upon the sheepdogs or the shepherd to get revenge for them, which is, of course, justice. And what happens is because the wolves are neither servants of the shepherd, nor do they really care for the sheepdog because they feel they can do it on their own. There's this animosity between the two sides. And you see this as a reflection of society. The wolves are considered the villains because they have teeth, they will use their teeth, and they really don't respect the weakness of the sheep, refuse to be bullied by the sheepdogs, and they hate the shepherd for trying to control them as they do their little flock. These would be your survivalists, your people in society who are anti-government, your people who just want to be left alone and really don't like the idea of government intervention in their lives and things like that. By trying to define that government intervention as the sheepdogs trying to protect the sheep for the benefit of the shepherd and the entire flock, I think Grossman is basically glorifying the fact that the government does in fact overstep its bounds. He's trying to discuss it away using the psychological archetype of the sheepdog, or let's just put it simpler, the hero, the victim, and the villain. Anyone who isn't in the program of being part of the flock, who isn't a sheepdog out to protect the flock, is of course a villain. This is the type of mentality that forgets that human beings by nature are flawed. That we also come to the seven deadly sins, greed, wrath, lust, sloth, all these other things which mark us as being flawed, and of course mark us as being equals, human beings, no better, no worse than each other. I completely disagree with the idea of even suggesting that there is a victim archetype, or that people should cater to a victim archetype and accept that a hero is there to come save them.